Andre was having an okayish day, until the incident. It wasn't even his fault. He was just minding his own business in the library, trying to finish his homework when he overheard something. Luther Hayes, the most popular guy in school, tall, athletic, and ridiculously good-looking, was on the phone, and Andre had managed to eavesdrop on the most embarrassing confession possible. Wait, he's afraid of spiders? Andre muttered under his breath. Unfortunately, he was a bit too loud. It all happened too fast. Luther caught his eye, the glint of murder flashing in his eyes. Before Andre could even try running, Luther was in front of him, with an intimidating look on his face. "What did you hear?" Luther asked. Andre's survival instincts kicked in immediately. "What? Nothing. I didn't hear a thing." His voice cracked. Luther narrowed his eyes. "Don't lie to me. You heard about the spiders, didn't you? Andre Frost?" Oh no. He could lie again. Pretend this was all a misunderstanding. But Andre's brain decided to do something very, very stupid. "Yes," Andre whispered. He expected Luther to yell or shove him into a bookshelf, but he did the worst possible thing. He smiled. "Perfect, you're working for me now," Luther said. "Excuse me?" Andre squeaked. "If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows about that fanfiction you wrote." Luther whipped out his phone, waving the screenshot in front of Andre's horrified face. "How did you?" "I have my ways." Andre's brain short-circuited. This couldn't be real life. How did Luther Hayes, the king of the school, know about Andre's secret Wattpad account where he'd written a whole saga of knights falling in love? It didn't matter. The damage was done. "You're my new assistant," Luther declared. "You'll do everything I say, or—" He trailed off, holding up his phone with a smirk. Andre's shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine. This was going to be a nightmare. A few days into their arrangement, Andre noticed something alarming. People were starting to notice him. Before this mess, Andre had lived a blissfully invisible life. But now, he was constantly at Luther's side, following his ridiculous demands like a slave. "Why are you making me carry your gym bag?" Andre asked, panting as they climbed the stairs. "Because I need my hands free for important things," Luther replied, scrolling through his phone without a care in the world. Andre scoffed, and before he could respond, a voice called. "Hey, Luther." It was Caleb, Luther's equally popular friend. Caleb's eyes landed on Andre, his eyebrows raising slightly. "Is this your new?" He trailed off, and Andre could immediately tell what he was implying. "Andre Frost? I'm not." "Yup," Luther interrupted, throwing an arm around Andre's shoulders with a grin. "He's mine now." Andre's brain stopped working. Caleb let out a low whistle. "Wow, didn't think you had it in you, Luther." "It's not like that," Andre yelled, face burning. "He's blackmailing me." Luther sighed dramatically, pulling Andre closer. "Ignore him. He gets shy." Andre wanted to scream. This was worse than the fanfiction blackmail. Way worse. The next day, Luther leaned casually against Andre's locker, flashing his usual smug grin. "Tonight, you're coming with me to a party." "Why would I do that?" Luther raised his phone, the dreaded screenshot of Andre's Wattpad profile lighting up the screen. "Do I really need to explain?" Andre Gruoned. "You can't be serious. I don't even like parties. They're just sweaty people and bad music. You're my assistant, and I need you there." "For what?" Andre crossed his arms. "To block people from flirting with me." Andre stared at him. "That's impossible. You're the most popular guy in school. Everyone flirts with you." "Exactly. And it's exhausting. Besides, if you don't come, I'll have to deal with Stacy." Andre raised an eyebrow. "Who's Stacy?" "You don't want to know," Luther muttered, shivering dramatically. "So, are you in or not?" Antla sight. This was his life now. Fine. The party was everything Andre hated. Loud music, flashing lights, and way too many people crammed into a single house. Luther, of course, fit right in. As soon as they walked through the door, he was swarmed by a crowd of admirers. Andre sat awkwardly by the snack table, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. He was definitely regretting this. "Having fun?" Luther's voice suddenly came from behind him. Andre turned, glaring. "No. Why am I even here if you're just going to ditch me?" "I didn't ditch you," Luther said with a smile. "There were too many people around me. I couldn't find you." Before Andre could respond, a girl appeared, practically throwing herself at Luther. "Luther, I've been looking for you all night," she cooed, batting her eyelashes. Luther tensed and Andre suddenly understood. This must be Stacy. Hey Stacy," Luther said, taking a step back. But Stacy was persistent. She leaned closer, ignoring Andre completely. "You promised me a dance, remember?" Andre couldn't help it. He snorted. Stacy's eyes glanced at him for the first time, her face darkening. Who's this? Luther hesitated for half a second, then threw an arm around Andre's shoulders. This is my boyfriend. Andre's eyes widened. Stacy froze, her eyes narrowing. You're what? My boyfriend, Luther said smoothly, pulling Andre closer. His smirk was in full force now, and Andre wanted to strangle him. Isn't that right, babe? Luther asked, turning to Andre with a challenging look. Andre wanted to say no. He wanted to scream, "What are you talking about?" But instead, the words that came out were, yep. Stacy looked between them, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, she huffed and stormed off, leaving Luther grinning triumphantly. That wasn't so bad, Luther said, releasing Andre. Andre stared at him. Are you insane? You just told Stacy we're dating. Do you have any idea what kind of rumors are going to spread? Luther shrugged. So, they're just rumors, except you want to make it real. He smirked. Andre groaned, burying his face in his hands. I hate you. By Monday morning, the entire school knew. Andre walked into the hallway to find people whispering and pointing at him like he was a zoo exhibit. Is that him? No way. Luther Hayes' boyfriend. I didn't even know Luther liked guys. Andre was ready to dig a hole and crawl into it. Of course, Luther was waiting for him at his locker, looking completely unbothered. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying the attention. Good morning, boyfriend, Luther said with a smirk. Andre glared at him. This is your fault. Relax. People will get over it. They're never going to get over it. You're the most popular guy in school, and I'm me. And what's wrong with you? Luther asked, leaning closer. Luther was looking at him with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. He quickly shook his head. Don't do that. Do what? Luther asked innocently. Whatever. This is... Andre gestured vaguely at him. Luther laughed. You're too easy to mess with, you know that? He wasn't sure how much more of this he could take. Luther was acting like he owned Andre, and Andre knew it was only a matter of time before the next ridiculous request came in. Luther leaned against the doorframe of Andre's classroom right after the bell rang for closing. Hey, Luther said nonchalantly, but his grin was a little too wide. You coming over to my place tonight? Andre blinked. What? No, I'm not. You are, Luther interrupted smoothly, his eyes gleaming. You're coming over to do homework. It's not negotiable. Andre's mouth opened and closed. No, I'm not. Luther didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone and flashed the screenshot of a smut scene in Andre's Wattpad story. I'm sure everyone at school would love to read about 2 nights doing the nasty. The statement caused Andre's cheeks to burn. Luther winked, shoving the phone back in his pocket. You have no choice, Andre. Plus, it's my house. You'll like it. By the time they reached Luther's house, Andre wasn't sure what he was expecting. Probably some mansion, some massive backyard, and a pool that took up half the block. Instead, Luther's house was a beautiful 2-story home, with a warm and homely vibe in a quiet neighborhood. This is nice, Andre muttered as Luther led him inside. Luther smiled, appreciating the compliment. When they reached the living room, Luther's parents were sitting on the couch, watching TV. Both were dressed casually, but they still had an aura of authority that made Andre nervous. Hey, Mom, Dad. Luther greeted them. Both parents immediately stood up, clearly surprised to see anyone follow Luther inside. His mom raised an eyebrow. Luther, she said, her voice kind. Who's your friend? This is Andre, Luther said, his voice suddenly quieter, as if he wasn't used to introducing anyone. He's, my friend. Luther's mom stared at him, surprised. Oh, we don't often get to meet your friends, she said, smiling warmly. Luther's dad simply gave Andre a smile, though his eyes still had a hint of suspicion. Well, it's nice to meet you, Andre. Nice to meet you too, Andre said, trying to be polite, though he was dying on the inside. Being introduced to Luther's parents wasn't part of the deal. We're going to do some homework in my room, Luther said, grabbing Andre's hand and leading him to his room. Well, dinner will be ready in an hour, so make sure you're finished by then, Luther's mom said loudly. As soon as they were out of the living room, Andre released the breath he didn't know he was holding. They got to Luther's room, and Luther immediately pointed at the bed. Sit down. We got homework to do. You're helping me, remember? Andre sighed dramatically. Yeah. What's first? Luther plopped onto the bed, holding out his math textbook. Help me with this, and I'll let you go home. Andre hesitantly sat next to Luther on the bed, pulling the textbook closer. For a moment, it was normal. They were just 2 guys working on homework. But that quickly turned into something far less innocent when Andre stood up, saying he wanted to go home, giving an obvious lie for an excuse. Truth was spending this much time alone with Luther made him feel more nervous than he had ever felt before. So he wanted out. "You're not taking this seriously," Luther murmured, his tone suddenly changing as he also stood up from his bed. Andre glanced up. Luther's face had gotten closer, his expression dark. "I am taking it seriously," Andre protested, though his heart started beating faster for some unknown reason. But before he could say more, Luther moved. The next thing Andre knew, he was pressed up against the wall. "What the?" Luther didn't let him finish. "Shut up," he said in that voice, the one that made Andre's stomach flip. "You're not leaving yet." The sudden intensity of the situation left Andre breathless, pinned between Luther's chest and the wall. I'm not some toy for you to boss around," Andre gasped, his hands pushing weakly against Luther's chest. But Luther didn't move. Luther's smirk was devilish. "Are you sure about that?" Andre's heart raced, his mind spinning. Was this how it was going to be now? Was Luther really going to make him feel things that he wasn't sure he should? There was a knock on the door just then, and Luther's mom's voice broke the tension. "Dinner's ready, boys." Luther stepped back, a strange look in his eyes as he watched Andre's flustered expression. "Yeah," Luther muttered, his voice strangely softer now. "Let's go eat." Dinner was awkward. Andre sat across from Luther in the dining room. It wasn't that he wasn't hungry, but his mind kept replaying what had happened earlier in the room. Luther's parents were talking amongst themselves, giving the two boys some space, but Andre was anything but comfortable. Every time he glanced over at Luther, he saw his usual lazy smile, the glint in his eyes. It was like he knew exactly what he was doing. Just as Andre was about to take a bite of his food, his phone buzzed. It was Luther. Why would he text him if he's sitting right across from him? Luther's text reads, "Hey, Andre. If you keep avoiding eye contact with me, I might just have to pin you down again later. Maybe even on the dinner table." Andre choked. He looked around the room, hoping no one had noticed the sudden redness spreading across his face. But of course, Luther's eyes were on him. Andre tried to play it cool, but his heart was racing. He quickly shoved the phone into his pocket, his hands shaking slightly. "You okay there, Andre?" Luther's mom asked. Andre's head snapped up. He smiled awkwardly. Yeah, I'm fine." Luther's mom raised an eyebrow, her gaze shifting between Andre and her son. "You sure? You look a little flushed." Luther, in his usual nonchalant way, gave his mom a dismissive wave. "He's fine, Mom. He's just not used to good food." Andre shot Luther a glare, but Luther just leaned forward, his voice dropping low enough for only Andre to hear. "You should have seen your face when you read that text." Andre hoped Luther could not hear the way his heart was beating fast. "Stop it. I'll stop," Luther said with a fake pout. "But you know, I'm not the only one who's making things awkward." "What? You can't even look at me now, can you?" Luther continued, his voice teasing. "Tell me, Andre, what are you thinking about?" The question hung in the air, and Andre was frozen. It wasn't even just the text anymore. It was the fact that Luther was doing this right here, in front of his parents, who clearly weren't buying the previous excuse. Luther's mom glanced at Andre once again, clearly noticing his discomfort. "Luther," she said softly, "can you give the poor boy some space?" Luther flashed his mom a quick grin. "Yes, sure, Mom. I'll stop bothering him." Andre sank lower into his chair, praying for the earth to swallow him whole. His face was completely red. I'm fine, Mrs. Hayes." "Really?" Andre muttered. Luther's mom narrowed her eyes at him, but then she smiled warmly. "You're welcome to call me Maria. Don't mind my son. He's a bit of a handful." Andre nodded quickly, smiling awkwardly. It was Monday morning, and Andre wasn't prepared for today. He had been ignoring Luther's texts, and he was determined to ignore him entirely at school. He didn't know why, but something about Luther's teasing had gotten under his skin more than usual. So, when gym class ended and the rest of the guys filed out of the locker room, Andre took his sweet time. He figured he'd stay back until the coast was clear, giving him one less chance to run into him. But of course, luck was never on his side. Andre had just shoved his gym shirt into his locker when he heard the sound of the door creaking open. His stomach sank, immediately knowing it was Luther. Maybe if he stayed quiet, Luther would leave. "I know you're in here, Andre." Luther's voice smugged. Andre cursed under his breath. He grabbed his backpack and slammed the locker shut, spinning around to make a run for it. But there Luther was, leaning casually against the lockers with a grin on his face. "Really? You're hiding in the locker room now?" Luther said, tilting his head. "What? You've been avoiding me all weekend and thought you could dodge me at school too?" Andre narrowed his eyes, trying to push past him. "I'm not avoiding you. I've just been busy." "Busy?" Luther asked, raising an eyebrow. "Too busy to answer a single one of my texts." Andre felt his cheeks flush as he clutched his bag tighter. "I didn't feel like talking, okay? Now move." Luther didn't budge. Instead, he stepped closer. Did I do something to scare you off? Luther asked, his voice dropping lower, more serious now. No. Andre snapped, his voice cracking slightly. Why would you think that? Because you're acting like I did. Luther's eyes locked onto Andre's. He looked genuinely curious, concerned even. I just needed space. That's all. Space, Luther repeated. From me? Andre tried to sidestep Luther again, but the boy was faster, moving to block him once more. Luther, Andre hissed, glaring up at him. Get out of my way. But Luther didn't move. Instead, he leaned forward, one hand slapping the locker next to Andre's head. Andre flinched as the sound echoed through the empty room. He was now trapped between the locker and Luther's towering frame. Why are you running from me? Luther asked, his voice quiet but firm. Andre swallowed hard, his breath hitching as Luther leaned in closer. He hated how small he felt in moments like this, how Luther had a way of making the air between them feel charged. I'm not running, Andre mumbled, though even he didn't believe it. Luther's smirk returned. You're lying, Andre. And you're a terrible liar. Andre tried to look away, but Luther's free hand reached out, gently tilting Andre's chin up so their eyes met. Andre felt his heart pounding fast in his chest. Tell me the truth, Luther murmured. Why'd you ignore me? Andre's mouth went dry. Andre started, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how to deal with you. Luther blinked. Deal with me? He asked, his brows furrowing. You're everywhere. Andre blurted out, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Always teasing me, always pushing me around, and Luther smirked. Go on, he said, his tone lighter now. I'm listening. Andre glared at him. No, forget it. Just move. But Luther didn't move. Instead, he leaned closer, his face inches from Andre's. You're confusing, you know that? Andre's breath hitched again. I'm confusing? Yeah, Luther said, his voice quieter now. You're all tough 1 second, and then the next, you're blushing like crazy because I sent you one stupid text. Andre's face went red. Shut up. Luther chuckled softly, his grin widening. You're cute when you're mad. Andre shoved at Luther's chest, trying to push him away, but Luther didn't budge. Instead, he grabbed Andre's wrist, his hold firm but not painful. I missed you this weekend, Luther said suddenly, his tone softer than before. Andre froze, his eyes widening. What? You heard me. Luther's gaze softened, his smirk fading. It was boring without you. Andre stared at him, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure Luther could hear it. For a moment, the tension between them hung heavy, neither of them daring to move. Don't avoid me again, Andre, Luther said, his voice teasing once more. It's no fun without you. Before Andre could respond, Luther finally stepped back, giving him room to breathe. See you in class, Luther said casually, as if nothing had happened. And with that, he was gone, leaving Andre alone in the locker room, his heart racing and his mind spinning. Andre spent the rest of the day in a daze, replaying the locker room encounter over and over again. He hated that Luther had this effect on him, but what annoyed him more was that, for all his teasing, Luther wasn't entirely bad. He realized that he always seemed to be nice to him. It was almost as if he was always there for him. He thought it was just a one-time thing, but it went on and on. As they left the gym later that day, Andre realized he'd left his water bottle behind. He'd grown about to go back and get it, but before he could even turn around, Luther appeared beside him, holding the water bottle. Looking for this? Luther asked. Andre blinked, surprised. You grab it for me? Luther shrugged. You're hopeless, so I figured you'd forget. Andre frowned, snatching the bottle out of his hand. Thanks, I guess. Don't mention it. Luther winked and walked off, leaving Andre standing there, confused but oddly touched. The next day, Andre was running late for class, fumbling with his books as he raced down the hall. Just as he was about to drop his notebook, a hand shot out and caught it. Careful there, Luther said. Andre stared at him, baffled. You're being nice again. Luther tilted his head with a playful grin. Don't get used to it. But Andre couldn't stop noticing. By Wednesday, it was impossible to ignore. When Andre was struggling to open his locker, because of course the stupid thing got jammed again, it was Luther who appeared out of nowhere, smacking the door lightly until it clicked open. You need me, just admit it. Andre rolled his eyes but mumbled, thanks. It wasn't just the big things, though. It was the little stuff, too. The way Luther would always save him a seat in the cafeteria, even when Andre pretended he didn't want to sit with him. Or how Luther never let anyone else pick on him, shutting down even the smallest jokes with a sharp glare. Why are you doing all this? Andre finally asked one afternoon as they walked out of class together. Doing what? Luther said innocently, tossing his bag over his shoulder. You know what? Andre shot back. All these nice things. It's weird. Luther stopped walking and turned to face him, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Andre thought he might actually get a serious answer. Then Luther smirked. Maybe I'm just trying to win you over. Andre groaned, pushing past him. You're impossible. Admit it, Luther called after him, his voice filled with laughter. You're starting to like me. Andre didn't respond, but his cheeks burned all the way home. That evening, Andre sat on his bed, staring at his phone. He told himself he wasn't waiting for a message from Luther. He was just bored, checking his notifications. Totally normal. But when his phone buzzed, his heart leapt anyway. Luther, did you make it home safe? Andre frowned at the screen. Why was Luther being so thoughtful? It didn't make any sense. Andre, obviously, I don't need you to babysit me. The reply came almost immediately. Luther, you're welcome, by the way. Andre rolled his eyes, but couldn't stop the small smile tugging at his lips. Andre, for what? Annoying me to death? Luther, for making your day interesting. Andre's face burned as he typed out a quick response. Andre, good night, Luther. He didn't wait for a reply, tossing his phone onto his desk and flopping back onto his bed. But when his phone buzzed again a minute later, he couldn't help but check it. Luther, good night, Andre. Andre stared at the screen, his chest feeling weirdly tight. Andre spent the entire weekend battling the truth he didn't want to admit. He liked Luther. Actually liked him. Not in that he's so annoying I want to strangle him way, but in that he makes my stomach flutter and I want to kiss him way. The realization hit him like a truck Sunday night when he found himself rereading Luther's last text, smiling like an idiot. He'd stared at his phone for 20 minutes, debating whether to reply with something flirty. But what could he even say? Hey, I think I like you even though you blackmail me, nope. Absolutely not. So, on Monday morning, Andre did the only thing he could think of: avoid Luther at all costs. Again, Andre spent the entire day dodging Luther. He switched up his usual routes between classes, skipped lunch in the cafeteria, and even sat in the back corner of math class where Luther wouldn't think to look for him. But of course, Luther wasn't stupid. By gym class, Andre's luck finally ran out. He was halfway to the locker room when he heard that familiar voice behind him. Hey, Andre. Andre froze, and before he could figure out an escape plan, a hand grabbed his wrist and yanked him inside the janitor's closet. Gotcha, Luther said, closing the door behind them. What the hell, Luther? Andre hissed, glaring at Luther. What the hell, you? Luther shot back, crossing his arms. You've been avoiding me all day. What's going on? Nothing, Andre said quickly, looking anywhere but at Luther. Luther leaned closer, narrowing his eyes. You're a terrible liar. You know that? I'm not lying, Andre said, stepping back and immediately bumping into the shelves behind him. Luther moved closer, effectively trapping him against the wall. Then tell me why you're acting so weird. I'm not acting weird. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are, Luther said again, his voice softer this time. And it's starting to freak me out, Andre. Did I do something? If I crossed a line, you didn't do anything, Andre blurted out, cutting him off. Luther stared at him, looking genuinely confused. Then what's the problem? Andre hesitated, his heart pounding. Andre swallowed hard, his face burning. I like you, okay? The words hung in the air between them, and Andre braced himself for laughter, teasing, or, worst of all, rejection. But none of that happened. Instead, Luther's face lit up with the biggest, happiest grin Andre had ever seen. Wait, seriously? Luther said, his voice almost giddy. Andre looked down, avoiding his gaze. Forget I said anything. Not a chance, Luther said, his tone so bright that Andre couldn't help but look up. Before Andre could say another word, Luther cupped his face and kissed him. The kiss was soft and slow. For a moment, Andre was too stunned to react. But then he melted into it, his hands hesitantly gripping Luther's shirt. When they finally pulled apart, Luther rested his forehead against Andre's, still grinning like a fool. I can't believe this, Luther said, his voice filled with laughter. You actually like me. Andre groaned, burying his face in Luther's chest. Don't make it weird. I'm not making it weird, Luther said, laughing. I'm just really happy. You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this. Andre looked up at him, frowning. What do you mean? Luther's grin softened, turning into something more shy, scratching the back of his head. I've kind of maybe had a crush on you since forever, Andre. The blackmail thing? That was just a dumb excuse to get closer to you. I didn't think you'd ever actually like me back. Andre stared at him, his heart doing that fluttery thing again. You're such an idiot. Yeah, Luther said, brushing his thumb over Andre's cheek. But I'm your idiot now. Andre rolled his eyes, but he couldn't stop himself from smiling. Word spread fast around the school. By lunchtime the next day, everyone knew that Luther and Andre were a couple, for real this time. It wasn't like they'd announced it or anything, but when Luther started walking Andre to class with his arm casually draped over his shoulders, and Andre didn't shove him off, people caught on quickly. As soon as they sat down at Luther's usual table, one of his friends, Jake, grinned mischievously and leaned forward. So, Jake began, smirking at Luther. You finally managed to date your crush? Luther froze, his usual confidence crumbling in an instant. Jake, don't. What? Jake said, feigning innocence. I'm just saying, you've been pining after him forever. It's about time you made a move. Andre blinked, turning to Luther with wide eyes. Wait, forever? Luther groaned, his face turning bright red. It wasn't forever. Oh, it was forever. Jake teased, grinning even wider. I'm talking like months, maybe even years. Andre's lips twitched, fighting back a smile. You've liked me for that long? Shut up, Luther muttered, burying his face in his hands. Jake cackled, clearly enjoying himself. Man, I've never seen you blush this hard. It's hilarious. Andre reached out, tugging Luther's hands away from his face. Hey, he said softly, his voice just loud enough for Luther to hear. It's okay. I think it's cute. Luther peeked at him through his fingers, his cheeks still pink. You do? Andre smiled, leaning closer, so only Luther could hear. Yeah, I think you're pretty cute in general. Luther's face somehow turned even redder, and Jake, watching the entire exchange, burst into laughter. Wow, Jake said, shaking his head. You're totally whipped. Whatever, Luther muttered, glaring half-heartedly at him. But his hand found Andre's under the table, squeezing it gently. The rest of the school year flew by so fast, and after graduation, later that summer, they packed up their things for college. Andre sat on Luther's bed, flipping through Luther's old photo album he'd found in the corner of the room. You're really going to keep that? Luther asked, with a little blush on his cheeks, leaning against the doorframe. Maybe, Andre said, smirking as he held up a picture of a younger Luther with braces. You were kind of cute back then, too. Luther groaned, grabbing the album and tossing it onto the desk. If you're done embarrassing me, we should probably finish packing. Andre laughed, but his expression softened as he watched Luther fold a pile of shirts. Hey, Luther? Yeah. Andre hesitated, his voice quieter now. Thanks for everything. Luther turned to him, his brow furrowed. Where's this coming from? I don't know, Andre said, shrugging. I'm glad we're doing this. Go to college together, I mean, it's kind of nice knowing I won't have to figure it all out on my own. Luther smiled, sitting down beside him. Yeah, well, you're stuck with me now. You better get used to it. Andre rolled his eyes, but he couldn't hide his smile. I think I can handle that. They weren't just starting college, they were starting a new chapter together. And Andre couldn't wait to see what came next. The end.